Tired of forgetting what you read in another language? This podcast flips the script. Because in this episode, you will learn
the surprising reason why memorizing everything actually slows your fluency down.
A powerful 5-letter method that shows you exactly how to turn reading into long-term language gains.
Why some information sticks and why most of it doesn't until you change this approach.
How to avoid the one mistake most learners make after reading vocabulary or grammar.
You know that feeling, right? You spend ages reading something, maybe in Spanish or French, really trying to soak it all in. And then later, it's just gone, like sand through your fingers.
Totally. It's a really common frustration, especially with language learning.
So if you're looking for a way to actually make that knowledge stick, maybe without feeling quite so overwhelmed, well, you're in the right place.
Yeah, that's really the core of what we're digging into today. How do you actually remember what you read for language learning?
And the goal isn't like total recall of everything, is it?
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's about remembering what's important, what you actually need to use the language effectively.
Yeah.
Not becoming some kind of walking encyclopedia.
Okay. And we're basing this on a system, right? Something developed for complex info.
Exactly. It's a framework I've used for years, actually, for retaining pretty dense stuff. And it turns out it applies really well to picking up languages, too. So the aim for this deep dive is to give you that framework, a method to not just, consume language materials, but to properly digest them.
Which should lead to remembering more.
And, crucially, being able to actually use what you learn with confidence.
All right, let's unpack this then. I think a big hurdle for learners is feeling like you have to remember every single word, every grammar point you read.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get discouraged when you can't recall, say, all the new vocab from that article you just read.
It feels like failure sometimes.
It does, but it's often an unrealistic expectation we put on ourselves. I mean, think about someone truly exceptional, like Kim Peek, the real Rain Man.
Yeah, him. His memory was unbelievable, wasn't it?
Off the charts. He could apparently memorize entire books word for word after just one read. Detailed maps, historical dates, everything.
Like a human Google before Google even existed. Ask him for directions between, London and Tokyo, and you just reel off the route.
Pretty much. It was quite astounding. And it seems his incredible memory came from a really rare brain structure.
How so?
Well, he had macrocephaly, a very large brain, and crucially, he was born without the corpus callosum. That's the main bridge connecting the two halves of the brain.
Wow.
So scientists think his brain basically rewired itself, creating unique pathways to compensate, which resulted in this almost photographic recall.
Amazing memory, but there was a downside, right? It wasn't all perfect.
Exactly. That's the key point here. Despite that phenomenal recall, Kim Peek really struggled with abstract reasoning and problem solving, things we take for granted.
So he could recite a book, but maybe not discuss its themes deeply.
Precisely. Imagine a test. If it was pure memorization lists, facts, he'd probably ace it. But if it required higher level thinking, applying concepts, someone with, let's say, normal memory but strong reasoning skills would likely do better.
Okay, so what's the lesson there for us language learners? We're not trying to be Kim Peek.
Right. It underlines that our goal isn't just rote memorization of vocab and rules. Language is about communication, right?
Yeah.
Understanding nuance, solving communication problems, navigating social situations.
Yeah, using it.
Exactly, using it. So we need to focus on remembering what's necessary for that effective use, not every single tiny detail we stumble across.
That feels much more achievable. So how do we figure out what is necessary, and how do we remember that stuff?
Okay, so that brings us to this framework I mentioned. It starts with a simple idea. Not all the information you encounter when you're learning is the same. It doesn't all deserve the same treatment.
Makes sense.
And this system is called PACER. P-A-C-E-R.
PACER. Okay, sounds like a plan. What do the letters stand for?
PACER is an acronym that helps us sort information into 5 types: procedural, analogous, conceptual, evidence, and reference.
Okay.
And spotting which category a piece of information falls into is really important because each one needs a different kind of digestion process to stick properly.
Yeah. So if you use the wrong process,
You waste time, you end up passively reading, and ultimately you forget it, which is what we're trying to avoid.
got it. Okay, let's break down PACER for language learning then. First up, PACE procedural. What's that about?
Procedural info in language is basically the how-to. It's knowing how to do things, like how to pronounce words correctly, how to conjugate verbs, how to actually use grammar structures in a sentence, maybe how to write characters if you're learning, say, Mandarin or Japanese.
Yeah.
Even how to use common conversational phrases.
So the practical skills, the doing part.
Exactly. It's skill-based.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way, really the only way, to make this stuff stick is practice.
Makes sense.
The sooner you actually apply it, you speak, you write, you use that grammar pattern, the better you'll internalize it.
Yeah, you can read pronunciation guides all day, but actually trying to make that French R sound is where the learning happens.
Totally.
But okay, what if you're reading something procedural, like verb conjugations, but you don't have a chance to practice speaking or writing right then and there?
That's a really common situation. The key principle here is trying to balance consumption, taking information in with digestion, which is the active processing, like practice.
So don't just read and read without doing.
Ideally, yeah. If you can't practice that procedural thing right now, maybe it's better to switch focus. Or just pause consuming that type of info until you can practice. Just trying to passively memorize the how-to without doing it is usually pretty inefficient.
Right. Balance consumption and digestion. Okay, what about analogous?
Analogous information is all about making connections. It's linking new language concepts to stuff you already know.
Like what? From my native language?
Could be. Maybe a grammar rule in German functions a bit like one in English. Or maybe you learned Spanish before and you see a similar concept in Italian. It could also be cultural and idiom in Japanese that has a sort of parallel in your own culture.
Ah, I see. Finding those similarities.
Finding similarities, yes. But the digestion process here is critique. And by critique, I don't mean finding fault. I mean actively comparing and contrasting.
Okay, how does that work?
You ask yourself, how are these things similar?
Yeah.
But also, crucially, how are they different? Where does the analogy break down? When is the German rule not like the English one?
Ah, so it's deeper than just saying, oh, that's similar.
Much deeper. That active analysis, that critique, really strengthens your understanding because you're hooking the new information onto your existing mental framework, your neural network.
Okay, that makes sense. So P is practice, A is critique. Next is C, conceptual. What falls under that?
Conceptual information is kind of the what and why behind the language. It's the grammar rules themselves, the actual meanings of vocabulary words, understanding the cultural context that shape how language is used, maybe some linguistic principles if you're going deep.
The underlying knowledge base.
Exactly. And the best process for this is mapping.
Mapping. You mean like mind maps, drawing diagrams.
Precisely. Non-linear network-based note-taking. Mind maps are a great example. See, language knowledge isn't really linear, is it? It's not a list.
No, it's all connected.
It's a web, a network of interconnected concepts. Mapping helps you visually recreate that network. You can see how vocabulary relates, how grammar fits in, how culture influences things.
So if I'm learning words about food,
you could create a map, branching out with related verbs, adjectives, maybe grammatical structures for ordering food, even cultural notes about meal times or etiquette.
And I guess you could link analogies in there too.
Absolutely. Those A insights can become nodes on your C map, strengthening those connections even further. But again, the key is balancing the reading with the active map creation. Don't just read about concepts, map them out.
Okay, mapping for conceptual. Got it. Moving on to E, evidence.
Evidence is the concrete stuff that backs up the concepts. It's the specific examples that show a concept in action.
Can you give an example for language learning?
Sure. It could be seeing a grammar rule used perfectly in a real sentence, or maybe finding statistics about word frequency, or reading about a specific real-world scenario that perfectly illustrates a cultural norm you learned about.
practical proof almost.
Yeah, you could think of it like that. Demonstrations. And the process here is store and rehearse.
Store and rehearse.
Yep. First, store the good examples you find. Note them down, maybe add them to your concept map, put them in a notebook, maybe even make flashcards of the example.
Okay, store them, then rehearse.
Then rehearse, but probably after you finish your reading session. Actively use those examples. Try creating your own sentences mimicking the pattern. Explain the grammar point using that specific example. Talk about the cultural scenario.
So the rehearsal is active usage of the evidence.
Exactly. It solidifies the link between the concept and its real-world application.
Okay. Store and rehearse for evidence. That leaves our reference. What's that?
Reference information is usually the highly specific sort of granular detail, things that aren't typically crucial for the big picture understanding, but you might need to look them up occasionally.
Like the exact spelling of a really rare word.
Yeah, or maybe a very specific historical date related to the language, if that's relevant to you. Or perhaps a super technical grammatical term that most people don't need for communication, the real nitty-gritty stuff.
Okay, the fine print.
Pretty much. And the process here is also store and rehearse, but the emphasis is a bit different. It's often more about direct recall.
How so?
Well, things like flashcards, especially using spaced repetition systems, SRS, like Anki, are really ideal for this. The goal is often just to be able to retrieve that specific fact when needed.
So you don't need to deeply integrate it like a concept.
Not usually. You just need to be able to access it. The important thing is not to get bogged down trying to memorize these tiny reference details while you're first reading the main material. Store them, rehearse them efficiently later if needed.
Okay, wow. So PACER procedural, analogous, conceptual, evidence, reference. The big idea is you need to figure out what kind of information you're looking at.
Consciously identify it.
And then use the right method to actually digest it. Practice, critique, map, or store and rehearse.
Absolutely. That's the core message. Effective learning and, importantly, retention really hinge on that active processing. You have to balance the consuming with the digesting, using the right technique for the job.
And if you neglect the digestion part?
That's when things slip away. That's when you feel like you read for hours but learn nothing. It's often because the active processing step was missed or the wrong process was used.
Okay, so just to recap, this PACER system seems like a really practical way to approach reading materials when you're learning a language.
It provides a clear framework, a starting point to make your learning much more efficient and hopefully less frustrating.
So here's something maybe to think about, a little takeaway.
Go for it.
The next time you sit down to read something in your target language, an article, a chapter, whatever, try to consciously think about PACER. Ask yourself, okay, what kind of information is this? Is it procedural, conceptual, evidence? And then maybe actively decide, what's the best way for me to digest this piece right now? Should I be practicing this, critiquing it against what I know, mapping it out, or storing it to rehearse later?
Yeah, that deliberate effort, just taking that moment to categorize and choose your digestion strategy, can honestly make a huge difference. It helps you move beyond just letting the words wash over you.
Towards actually internalizing and remembering what matters.
Exactly. That's the goal.